So today, medical device regulators are demanding mature security. And it used to be that enforcement of security was highly dependent on the individual reviewer of a submission. But businesses can no longer tolerate the risk and uncertainty of a single reviewer. And therefore, regulators' expectation is that a device comes to them with mature security considerations as part of their review. And those device makers that are able to meet that expectation are able to win in the marketplace. So I think one of the biggest challenges when developing a strategy has to do with truly understanding how security fits into your business. In some instances, security is often perceived as a cost center and nothing more than a tick-the-box exercise. In other organizations, they position it as being critical to generating business value and new business opportunities. I think the biggest challenges faced as defining your strategy will be what type of organization structure do you have and what competencies does your company retain that allow you to either capitalize on those security capabilities or possibly lose because you don't have enough of those capabilities. Another core challenge is really understanding your regulatory environment as well as your customers' expectations. There was a long time where customer expectations were actually a little more mature than what the regulator was able to enforce. Knowing the answer to both of those questions, as well as who potential customers are that may require a different expectation, will directly impact how you define your strategy. The last thing I would mention is that there's something over the notion of when you define your device at a point of production versus the taking care of the device over the life cycle. And what I mean by that is once a device is out in the field, you have to be able to maintain it. Imagine something happens and you need to be able to revoke the ability for that device to operate. Or the device is now operating inside somebody else's hospital and you need to be able to monitor what's occurring. There's a lot of cases in healthcare where we don't always have clearer visibility into what the device is doing. And that can prove in and of itself to be a challenge to know how to assess it. Having a strategy for these scenarios is critical to then knowing how you can architect your security strategy to mitigate those risks as much as possible. Last point I would make is that your mitigation strategy should directly align with your business strategy. You cannot have an organization that is successful at security if they are not able to say how security directly ties into both the business value as well as the strategic plan for an organization. So the FDA's expectations of device makers is not novel. They have been singing on this same trajectory for many years at this point, what their expectations are for device makers, and it hasn't meaningfully changed. The thing that has changed is their ability to enforce it. With the implementation as of October 1st, 2023 of the eStar program, that means every device coming under review needs to meet a certain bar of security expectations before they're allowed to proceed into full review. How that effectively changes things is those device makers who do not plan for security will hit this first roadblock and not be able to proceed with their review submission. There won't be an opportunity to say, my case is so novel and I have some great clinical innovation, because you won't even get to the point of being attached to a reviewer. Those who successfully do consider security and truly ingest the guidance and regulations into their development lifecycle process will be able to successfully not just pass this first bar, but be able to work through the regulatory process in a meaningful and obvious way. So you may ask yourself, how am I supposed to know if I'm on the right track? Well, I think there's some specifics that are able to assess that, right? First and foremost, having understood the key security practices embedded in the regulatory guidelines. Now, there are several standards referenced by the FDA, and there are several best practices that are accepted by the community that make it pretty straightforward to determine what security posture is required and what key decisions. This includes activities not just during the development of the device, but also around the device. What I mean by that are things like threat modeling assessments, knowing how your quality management system considers cybersecurity, and ensuring the documentation to support is robust. It also includes things like third-party assessments, such as a penetration test, where an unrelated party comes and does a security assessment of the device and is able to confirm, hey, these core security features have been considered, or gosh, there's a huge hole in your assessment and you need to do something about X. Collectively, if the company has truly worked to integrate security expectations into the development lifecycle process, you'll know you're on the right track because of these third-party assessments, because your regulatory team will be able to answer the core questions that they need to as they build together their submission packet. And lastly, you'll get good feedback from potential customers when you say, hey, we're working through our architecture and making this key change. How does that resonate with your security posture? And most frequently, the hospitals will be able to give a clear definition of what their expectation is, not just from a clinical perspective, but also from a security operational perspective. So the trends we're seeing with regards to deficiencies in the marketplace are interestingly across multiple facets of the device. There is regulatory related deficiencies, and these are things related to the documentation, the quality management system, the evidence provided to demonstrate security has been considered. We're also seeing deficiencies largely around personnel. This means the expectation that there are trained personnel that can manage the device over its lifetime, and not just from a credentialing perspective, but from an actual capability within the organization and being able to manage the risk associated with devices. The third major area we're seeing is around security risk management. These are things like ongoing threat modeling, things like interoperability considerations, how are third-party components being assessed as part of device builds, and how do any issues that arise get resolved. It's not necessarily a question of how many issues do you have, it's what is your process for mitigating them. There are two other major buckets that have to do with the lifetime of the device. One is around security architecture. So this means what fundamental architecture decisions were made that allowed the device maker to be in control of the device over its entire lifetime. This can be things like being able to patch once the device is out in the field, being able to understand how one device fits into an entire ecosystem, and understanding the use case of the device in terms of how it will be clinically utilized. The last major area is around testing and making sure that over the lifetime of development, there are considerations for tests that show not just a basic level of expectations, but a mature assessment of various scenarios that the device could operate in and knowing how to assess for those. With all that in mind and seeing these trends, device makers have many opportunities to manage these deficiencies. There are core things that can be done in terms of thoroughly reviewing their policies and procedures and identifying systemically what needs to change for them to design better devices that are secure from the onset. It also means that device makers should have a response plan in place and have practiced going through that response plan in something like a tabletop exercise. Furthermore, the ability to clearly respond to each deficiency with a plan and how you tell the story of that plan is actually really important for your FDA reviewers to be able to understand you have a strategy in place. And the last one is to maintain open communication, not just between the device maker and the regulator, but within the device maker themselves. Having your quality team be aligned with your development team, be aligned with your legal team is super critical. Otherwise, you won't be able to have an articulate formal response back out that is sustainable and true across the board. At the end of the day, taking your device to market is being done so that we can ensure patients get the best clinical opportunities available to them. Knowing that a device has had mature security considerations not only makes it more appealing to regulators, but also to the consumer of the device. That means healthcare organizations, that means patients. And at the end of the day, your device needs to be sufficiently safe for patients to consume novel clinical capabilities. This requires transparent alignment within an organization, as well as intentionality on budgeting and spending for security to become a true business enabler.